Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a closer look at something pretty significant happening in international relations.
hmm
It's being called the Ronny Jackson Bill concerning South Africa. The official title is the U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act of 2025.
Right. And our goal today is really to unpack this. What's it actually about? Why now? And what could it mean for the U.S.-South Africa relationship?
Exactly. And we should stress this is all based on the latest info we have up to around April 12th, 2025. So things are definitely still developing.
Absolutely. We've been digging into, well, the bill's text as we understand it, plus info from Congressman Jackson's own website, some reporting from the Citizen over in South Africa, and analysis from the Global Sanctions blog, trying to get the full picture.
And the backdrop here, which all our sources seem to agree on, is this feeling of, well, strained relations between the U.S. and South Africa.
Yeah, definite tension. It's talking about differing geopolitical alignments and some pretty clear foreign policy differences.
It's about how countries, position themselves globally, isn't it? Where their priorities lie, that kind of thing.
And the person bringing this forward, Congressman Ronny Jackson from Texas.
Well, his background is interesting, too. Former White House physician, closely linked with the previous administration.
Right. That context matters. It perhaps suggests a continuation of a certain viewpoint on foreign policy.
It certainly provides a lens, yeah.
And this isn't old news. The bill was just introduced April 3rd, 2025. Very current.
Right on the front burner.
And the core issue, the real sticking point, seems to be concern about South Africa getting closer to countries the U.S. sees as adversaries.
That seems to be the crux of it, yeah. So the bill itself, what does it do? Fundamentally, it mandates a review, a full review of the U.S.-South Africa relationship.
Just a review, or is there more to it?
Well, there's potentially a lot more. A key part is that it could give the U.S. president the authority to slap sanctions on South African officials.
Sanctions. On whom specifically? On officials deemed to be supporting countries like China, Russia, and Iran. Those the U.S. considers adversaries.
Okay. And you mentioned tensions were already there. This isn't coming out of a vacuum, right?
Not at all. Our sources point to things that have already happened, like the U.S. cutting financial aid, putting tariffs on some South African goods. So, yeah, the relationship was already feeling the strain.
That makes sense. Any specific flashpoints mentioned?
One big one highlighted is South Africa taking Israel to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, that case over Gaza.
Ah, right. That really drew some lines in the sand internationally, didn't it? It showed very different perspectives.
Definitely underscored some fundamental disagreements, yeah.
So let's get into the nuts and bolts of the bill. What exactly would it require the U.S. government to do?
Okay, so according to Congressman Jackson's website, step one is the president has to conduct this thorough review. And that's in consultation with key agencies, state, defense, the U.S. trade rep.
The big players.
Exactly. Then after that review, they've got 120 days from the bill becoming law to submit a report to congressional committees.
120 days, so they want it done fairly quickly.
Seems like it, yeah. Suggests some urgency.
And it's not just about writing a report, is it? You mentioned sanctions?
Right. The bill explicitly gives the president tools to impose sanctions. That's the language used. Against South African officials identified as supporting China, Russia, or Iran.
And how does that identification happen?
Well, it also requires another report specifically naming senior South African officials who meet the criteria for sanctions.
Wow, naming names.
Naming names. And interestingly, if the president decides not to sanction someone on that list, they have to tell Congress why.
So there's an accountability measure built in there?
Seems that way. It puts the onus on the administration to act or explain.
Congressman Jackson himself, his statements are quite strong, aren't they?
Very strong. He talks about South Africa brazenly abandoning the U.S. relationship to align with China, Russia, Iran, and even terrorist organizations.
That's pretty direct language.
Yeah, he calls it a betrayal demanding consequences. He really shows the strength of feeling behind this push.
And our sources link this to maybe a longer trend back to the previous administration.
They do. They mention a deterioration in relations starting then, and even point to an executive order from earlier this year, February 7th, 2025, that also addressed concerns about South Africa's actions. This bill seems to build on that.
So boiling it down, what's the core U.S. complaint about South Africa's foreign policy?
It seems to center on South Africa's policy of non-alignment. From the U.S. perspective, described in the sources, this isn't seen as neutral. It's seen as effectively siding with malign actors.
Malign actors like Russia, China.
And Hamas, specifically mentioned as a U.S.-designated terrorist group and an Iranian proxy. So that non-alignment is interpreted very differently in Washington.
Okay, crucially, what's the view from South Africa on all this? How are they responding?
Well, according to The Citizen, the South African government's been pushing for a new trade deal with the U.S., sort of trying to mitigate the impact of those tariffs already in place.
The 30% tariffs you mentioned?
Yeah, the presidency there called them a barrier to trade. So they're definitely feeling the economic pressure and looking for solutions.
And we've seen other signs of friction too, haven't we? Like the ambassador issue.
Right. The sources mentioned the expulsion of a former South African ambassador, Ibrahim Rasool, by Secretary of State Rubio. Plus, you have groups like AfriForum and Solidarity visiting Washington. It all paints a picture of a relationship needing, well, careful navigation.
Definitely complex. Now, thinking practically, how does a bill like this actually move forward in the U.S. system? It's been introduced, but what happens next?
Well, right now, as of early April 2025, it hasn't really gone far beyond introduction. It's just sitting there, basically.
So what's the usual path?
Typically, it needs to go through committees in the House first,
Yeah.
then likely hold hearings, maybe debate it, maybe change it.
Amend it.
Yeah, amend it. If he gets through committee, it goes to a vote on the House floor. If it passes there, the whole thing repeats in the Senate committee. Floor vote.
And both the House and Senate have to pass the exact same version.
That's right. Then, finally, it lands on the president's desk to be signed into law or vetoed. It's a long process.
Any indication of its chances this time around, compared to maybe previous efforts?
Well, one source, The Citizen, noted something interesting. With Republicans currently controlling both the House and the Senate, that might give this bill a smoother path than maybe similar ideas had in the past when control was divided. Unified government could make a difference.
Okay. So let's speculate. If this does become law, what are the potential consequences we're looking at? It sounds like they could be widespread.
Oh, absolutely. The biggest impact would be directly on the U.S.-South Africa relationship itself. You could see diplomacy get even frostier.
Trade disruptions.
Definitely potential trade issues. And it could even affect South Africa's access to things like AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act.
Yeah.
That's huge for their exports to the U.S.
So real economic consequences. Could it also push South Africa to change its foreign policy?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The threat of sanctions on specific officials that could certainly create pressure internally in South Africa to rethink ties with China, Russia, Iran, or maybe change their stance on issues like Israel-Gaza.
It definitely raises the stakes.
Significantly. But, as we said, it's not a done deal. Far from it.
Still hurdles to clear.
Big hurdles. And likely need some bipartisan buy-in to get through Congress. And you can bet South Africa and maybe its allies would push back diplomatically.
Right. So just to make sure we've nailed the key components before we wrap up, can we quickly summarize the core elements again?
Sure. Number one, mandates a presidential review of the whole bilateral relationship, report due in 120 days. Number two, requires a separate report naming senior South African officials who meet criteria for sanctions.
And number three.
Number three, requires the president to justify not imposing sanctions on those named officials. Those are the key mechanisms.
Okay. So putting it all together, this Ronny Jackson bill really highlights, a serious point of friction in the U.S.-South Africa relationship.
Definitely. It's driven by these fundamentally different views on foreign policy and alliances.
And the potential outcomes, the review, the possible sanctions, they could really shake things up in terms of trade, diplomacy.
Very significant potential consequences, yeah.
And again, we have to emphasize, this is where things stand around mid-April 2025. The bill's future is uncertain. Its impact is still hypothetical.
Which leads to a bigger thought, really. You know, when you think about how interconnected global politics and trade are today, what happens if this does move forward? What are the ripple effects beyond just these two countries?
Good question.
What does this whole episode tell us about navigating these complex global alliances here in the 21st century? It's definitely something to keep watching.
Absolutely. Lots to think about there. Definitely a situation worth following closely, considering all the different angles and potential global impacts. Thanks for digging into this with us today.